Electro-Harmonix pedals have been a mainstay in our industry since clear back to the 1970s. Mike Matthews is a genius, and there have already been plenty of videos that have talked about the greatness of Electro-Harmonix pedals. Josh Scott with JHS being one guy that's put out some great content about Electro-Harmonix pedals. But today what I want to do is not only talk about the 10 best Electro-Harmonix pedals ever made, but also anchor these in popular music. So not only do we see what these pedals are, but we see where they were used in hit songs and with hit bands and artists that we recognize, so that we can really bring this full circle to really understand their influence in popular music and why they are still such staples to this day. And as we're going through our top 10 picks here for Electro-Harmonix pedals, if you have any places where you disagree or you would rearrange or add different effects, please do let us know in the comments. And if you know of other songs in popular music that have utilized some of these Electro-Harmonix effects, please do also put those in the comments. I'm also going to be linking in the description pedals that resemble these classic effects if they're no longer made, and also maybe some reissues if those exist through Electro-Harmonix. So you'll have a couple of different choices if you're interested in checking some of these out and want to either get newer boutique equivalents or go with a newer reissue, or of course you can always look for the original vintage one if you want to go fully old school, but you'll have all that available to you. So definitely check that out in the description as we go along. So starting first with number 10. It's the Electro-Harmonix Polychorus. Now, this is actually a really cool sounding chorus that I actually don't think gets as much credit for how good it sounds. And one popular application of this particular effect was with the band Nirvana, and Kurt Cobain was always a huge fan of this particular effect. And I think one example in popular music where you really hear this used quite a bit is in the song Heart-Shaped Box, huge hit for Nirvana, and on the solo section, you can hear kind of that modulation happening of the chorus, and that was nothing else other than this polychorus, and it just really sounds unique at what it does. It doesn't have sort of the hi-fi elements of a lot of those studio choruses. It doesn't sound maybe overly dark or swampy like some of the analog choruses of the same generation. It has just something unique about it that really paints the picture of what Electro-Harmonix brings to things. It's kind of a little bit funky, it's a little unique, but it just has a vibe, and I think that the solo really exemplifies that. And we'll see a little clip here of Kurt Cobain using it in context. Let's check it out. So absolutely great sound. Obviously this is a live performance version of it, but even on the album, I would just say it really makes the vibe of that solo. I can't imagine that guitar solo without that sound on it. It's just so much a part of the sound and the vibe of Nirvana, and certainly something that, again, you'd see Kurt Cobain along with a lot of other players use this effect. That is my pick for number 10. That brings us now to number 9, and this is kind of a really early incarnation of Electro-Harmonix pedal. It's none other than the LPB1. Now this originally was conceived as a device that would either plug into the guitar or in some cases would plug into the amp, and you'd run kind of like a long lead from the guitar and it would go into this. And no band in the 70s was more prominent of users of this particular device than Kiss and Ace Frehley. Now, in the 1975 live album, this was sort of the iconic sound of a cranked Marshall with this hitting the front end and basically just boosting it harder so that you could get some distortion and overdrive out of the amplifier. And this rock tone is just such a great rhythm tone, has so much body, has so much girth. Now, a lot of that is the Marshall, but a lot of those old Marshalls people forget, even if it's a plexi. It's kind of like a twin reverb equivalent of a Marshall. It doesn't have reverb, obviously, but it is a pretty clean amp, and you need something to goose that front end to kind of get it to give up the goods a little earlier. And certainly having this device running into it is giving it that extra saturation and distortion that the amp is just not capable of running on its own. Again, those early Marshalls were pretty clean amplifiers, especially when you're talking about those 100-watt heads. This is just helping create that distortion and that saturation a little earlier. It absolutely sounds great. So we're going to listen to a little bit of Rock and Roll All Night, again from the 1975 live record from Kiss. We're going to hear how this thing sounds in context. Again, such a classic song, such a classic application of this effect. I think it sounds great. It's just a wonderful boost that just adds a little bit of something extra to the amplifier. Great pick for number 9. Next, let's go to number 8. Now, this is a more recent classic than any of the other devices that we're going to be talking about today, and it's none other than the Pog. Now, there's been various incarnations of the Pog. There's, of course, been this giant version that is kind of the version that I'm going to be talking about today, but also there's been other incarnations that have been much smaller and still have very much of the vibe of the original Pog, so I think really any version of it is great, wonderful, and was certainly groundbreaking at the time that it was released. Now, one artist that I really want to showcase as a longtime user of this particular effect is John Frusciante from the Red Hot Chili Peppers. He's been a longtime Pog user for decades, and one of the examples that I think really showcases his usage of the Pog is on the album Stadium Arcadia. In the song She Looks to Me, you can hear in that outro the Pog comes in, he's kind of doing some soloing and creating some ambient effects with it, and it's an absolute quintessential application of what the Pog does best, and really I think just shows you how kind of just like unique this sound is and what a cool pedal it is in practice. Let's listen to that. So again, John Frusciante killing it with the Pog, sounds great, very unique, a very cool application of this. Of course, you can hear this on a lot of other Red Hot Chili Peppers music. Also wanted to showcase something here a little different than maybe what you haven't heard as a usage of the Pog. I think that there's some other songs like Snow, Heyo, that you can hear the polyphonic octave generator used on, the Pog used on, so you can check that one out too if you're interested. Let's move on to the next one. Next one is number 7. Now this was kind of a hard one for me to choose because it has a lot of classic applications, but I also think that there's another version of it that maybe is even more classic, so I'm going to save that up for a little bit later. But for number 7, I have to choose the Deluxe Electric Mistress Flanger. Now this is again, really classic effect used by a lot of people, but I think one of my favorite applications is from J Mascis and Dinosaur Jr. And the song Freak Scene is a great example where you can just hear this thing engaged. It has this sort of like droning effect that just kind of like takes over the entire song as you're kind of transitioning in between different parts of the song, and really just makes it come alive, gives you like this kind of like spacey effect. And J Mascis is just such an amazing user of effects pedals and uses tons of Electro-Harmonix pedals, and this is just something that I feel like really exemplifies what it does best. Of course, lots of other people have used this, including David Gilmour, but this is certainly, I think, kind of a unique version that definitely is like a showcase of what this thing can do. Let's listen to a little bit of Dinosaur Jr. and J Mascis. Again, sounds great. Dinosaur Jr. just has such a vibe, and I think that this just kind of helps sell what they're doing here. The music video is crazy. It's like so much all in the same vein of just like their whole entire band and kind of what the kind of the vibe is that they're going for. And I think it just sounds great. It's really a cool usage and definitely a quintessential Electro-Harmonix application for this particular song. All right, let's move on to number 6. Now, this is something that's a little bit different than a lot of the examples that we've been showing so far. This is actually not an application of a pedal being used on guitar. This is actually being used on a Rhodes, and it's from Billy Joel in the song Just the Way You Are. And this particular effect is a phaser, the small stone. And this was used on a lot of different instruments, not only guitar, and I think that this is one song that a lot of us know in popular music. And in that intro section of Just the Way You Are, you could hear that phase shifting happening right in the beginning, and just creates this warble and body to the overall music that I think is just really unmistakable. Let's listen to a little bit of Billy Joel performing this live, and you can definitely hear that phaser in play. Let's check it out.
Don't go try and please me. You never let me down before.
Great song, very musical. Of course, Billy Joel is an icon of just American rock music and pop music. And I definitely think that this phaser, without that there, the song would not be the same. You don't get that same body, that same warmth, that movement in the intro when the Rhodes is coming in and then he starts singing over it. Just an absolutely beautiful song and an absolutely beautiful application of using the small stone. Now that brings me to number 5, and it also brings me back to Kurt Cobain. And in keeping with the small series of Electro-Harmonix pedals, this time we're going to be talking about the small clone, a chorus that's also made by Electro-Harmonix. And I think one song that you can hear this most clearly in is in the introduction of Nirvana's Come As You Are, that droning kind of guitar tone, and you hear all that movement of the actual strings and just kind of how it fills up that space with that power trio in Nirvana. Just absolutely sounds insanely good. Just the amount of space that chorus fills up, you hear those droning notes, you hear it moving back and forth. It just sounds so huge for how abbreviated Nirvana was in terms of the number of players in the band. And it's just, again, that song would not be the same. It wouldn't be what we know it to be without that present. Let's listen to a little bit of that intro so you can hear exactly what I'm talking about. Come As You Are, such a classic song. Sounds great here. Again, that small clone just makes it what it is. It would not be the same without it. Absolutely love this. Absolutely love what it does. And again, a signature pedal of Kurt Cobain, always using it on all of his rigs. Absolutely sounds great. Now this brings me to number 4. Now going 4 to 1, these were all kind of interchangeable in terms of their influence on popular music and just where I feel like they sit. So these were all pretty hard picks to make. But at number 4, I chose the IC muff. This is the version 4 muff, and I think one of the most iconic users of this was nobody else than Billy Corgan from Smashing Pumpkins. And if you're thinking about Siamese Dream, it just has to be that particular pedal is the distortion sound of that album. I think a song that really helps exemplify this is Cherub Rock. You can hear Billy kind of goes over to his pedal when he's doing the live performance and just steps on it, and you just hear the whole sort of distortion vibe just overtake the entire room. It just adds so much girth and just a wall of sound to the distortion, and those tones with a Strat are just how big that gets. I just don't know if it's possible with that many other pedals, especially that were in existence during the time that this album was recorded. I think that the version 4 Big Muff is the sound of that album and certainly really cemented that band and that pedal as a result of that recording. Let's check out a little bit of Cherub Rock. So there it was, a little bit of Smashing Pumpkins, absolutely great sound, and just such a quintessential distortion sound that, you know, the Big Muff is just so much a part of that, and just again, the synergy of that band and that effect are just really hand in hand. Now this brings me to number 3. Now we talked a little bit earlier about the deluxe Electric Mistress, but now we're going to talk about the original Electric Mistress, Filter Matrix, and this also was used by guys like David Gilmour, but I think the most iconic user of it, which is often confused with being a chorus pedal, but is not, is Andy Summers from The Police. If we listen to any of those kind of chorusy sounds that most people associate Andy Summers with, it's going to be that flanger, that Electric Mistress flanger. And whether we're talking about Walking on the Moon or Message in a Bottle, all of that was the flanger and absolutely sounds incredible. And just the way that he uses it, the way that he sets it, maybe isn't so much of a typical flanger application if you're thinking about kind of like the Jet sound or something that like Paul Gilbert would use or Van Halen. but he makes it just sound so musical and so much of a texture. I think it's like such a special way to create ambient music, and the Police just sounded so huge. That chorus was a big part of that sound. So I want to play a little bit of Message in a Bottle from a live performance so we can just really hear what it does, and just using that, pairing it with a little bit of delay, just makes such a huge, beautiful, clean sound, just adds a little bit of texture to everything, and just made the Police, which were already just a power trio, just sound even bigger, and the clean sounds even more lush.
Message in a bottle. Message in a bottle. Oh, message in a bottle. Message in a bottle.
So that was the classic Message in a Bottle. Again, a quintessential sound of the Police. And again, a lot of us often think of this as a chorus sound, but it's actually a flanger sound. And it's just absolutely magical. Can't get enough of that clean tone. This brings me now to number 2. And again, as we start to get closer to number 1, these are just harder and harder choices to make. But I think I settled on this being the Electro-Harmonix Big Muff Ram's Head, and none other than David Gilmour, I think, is the most famous and popular user of this, especially when we're talking about guitar players and pop music. This was just so much a part of the sound of Pink Floyd and a lot of the iconic solos that we know and love. I think none of those solos are more popular than Comfortably Numb, and this was certainly a big part of just those singing lead tones that David Gilmour created, and just sounds so big, so fat, and just like so much sustain behind all those notes. And this was something that of course was incorporated into his rigs that Pete Cornish was putting together. Even Pete Cornish created some replicas of the Big Muff sound that David Gilmour has used subsequently. But this was just such an iconic sound at the time, and really so many guitar players, even to this day, are chasing that singing lead tone that David Gilmour created on Comfortably Numb. I think that it has to be in the top 2 just on the merits of its pervasiveness and how iconic that solo is in rock music. Let's check it out. Comfortably Numb, a classic, sounds incredible. David Gilmour just absolutely just killing it with just his voicings and just how he used this effect. I absolutely love it. It is still a component of his rig today, whether it's in its original format or some of the other muffs that he might be using, or even some of the Pete Cornish incarnations of sort of reinterpreting those muff tones, making it a little bit more reliable box, but none other than the Ram's Head. It's just such a great effect. If you haven't guessed it already, we're now at number 1, and has just become a iconic piece on a lot of players' rigs and is still just as in demand now as it ever was. It's none other than the Deluxe Memory Man. And I think, of course, nobody else other than the Edge from U2 is its biggest user. And whether we're talking about With or Without You, or the Joshua Tree album, or stuff earlier, or to this day, you're hearing Memory Man on practically everything. It is an amazing tone. It sounds incredible. It's sort of like a tape echo, and it was designed to be like a response to a solid state version of a tape echo that didn't have a tape, but just ended up sort of having its own vibe altogether. And I know that there's plenty popular examples of how this would be used from U2, but I want to go back to the It Might Get Loud video, and we see some clips of the Edge taking an AC30 out with a Memory Man. We see him working through a little bit of a song, and it kind of transitions to the Day Without Me tune, and I just kind of want to go back to that and just like listen to how he's using it, transition into A Day Without Me, and so you can just hear how the Memory Man was used. And Day Without Me is early on in U2's career, and so there weren't as many rack effects involved at that time, so it was relying certainly more heavily on the analog delays and not some of the Korg units that he's known to use later, or the TC units that he's known to use later. This is definitely hearing a lot of what's possible with this analog delay and just how much space it fills up, how beautiful the repeats are, and sort of the controlled chaos of that delay. It's not particularly efficient. It has sort of these quirks, but it's all part of the beauty of what makes it what it is. And just the preamp in there, the sheen that it adds, the pairing that it makes with an AC30, it's absolutely unreal. Let's listen to a little of that. Again, the Memory Man, total classic. Love this, but I'd love to hear from you about where you would maybe rearrange these top 10 picks that I've made, or maybe tell me about some other applications in popular music that you might have heard some of these. I'd love to hear from you again in the comments and get your feedback on this. Now, of course, if you love this video, I highly recommend that you give us a like, a subscribe, ring the bell icon so that you can stay up to date. That all goes a long way in helping us in the channel. And of course, if you want to help us further, you can always go to the links in the description where we've listed several different devices that are either along the lines of the things that we've talked about today as our top 10, not only reissues in some cases, but also high-end boutique versions of a lot of these Electro-Harmonix pedals. So definitely check that out if you're interested in any of these. Or you can head over to the Vertex Effects website. You can get a pedal of ours. We have all of our authorized dealers listed on the website as well. And if you're interested in buying any pedalboard-based supplies, cables, zip ties, tie-down mounts, Velcro, that's all available over on the rigdr.com. So you can buy that there if you're upgrading your pedal board and want to get the best, highest quality stuff. Another free way to support what we're doing is head over to our podcast. That's available on all the podcatchers, whether that's Apple or Spotify, etc. And you can listen to us while you're making your commute to work, and you can learn a little bit more about pedalboard best practices, about getting great tones. We interview other rig builders, other artists, and have some really great conversations that are available over there. And until next time, I'm Mason Marangella from Vertex Effects, aka The Rig Doctor. See you later.